25 months before he reigned supreme at WrestleMania 20, Eddie Guerrero was kind enough to share with me some veteran wisdom he gleaned from his own father, and I'm going to share it with you next. I'm Mike Quackenbush, and this is Till We Make It. Right here on my channel, I make videos for fellow professional wrestlers at every single stage of their career. And I do this because when I was just starting out, I didn't have a coach or a mentor for my first 3 years in wrestling. So I didn't have the benefit of veteran wisdom or insight or knowledge. Today's video is part of my series, Icons and Insights, in which I share with you wisdom gleaned and lessons learned from wrestling superstars past and present. And this one is near and dear to my heart because it gives me a chance to recount to you a favorite story from the early days of my career. We're going all the way back to February of 2002, when I was fortunate enough to share a locker room and share the ring with Eddie Guerrero. Let me set the scene for you a little bit. In February of 2002, my Wrestle Factory had only been open for business for about 4 weeks. Back then, we were on Linden Street in Allentown, PA. And quite a few times, I had been promised matches against top-name wrestlers by a variety of promoters, and yet, more times than not, these matches never came to fruition. I remember being assured multiple times that I'd be having singles matches against Taka Michinoku, a guy who I think is pretty fantastic. And you know what? None of those matches ever happened. Quite a few times, I was promised a match against Too Cold Scorpio, who, for my money, is maybe the most underrated high flyer of all time. And to this day, I've never been in the ring with Too Cold Scorpio. And more than once, I was told that I was going to be having a match against Dr. Wagner Jr. And I don't know why it was always Dr. Wagner Jr., but I was never in the ring with Dr. Wagner Jr., that much I can tell you. So it was with just scrutiny that I accepted this booking up in Lynn, Massachusetts, where I was told I would be wrestling Eddie Guerrero, who not too long prior had been released by the then WWF. He was going through a rough patch in his life, and he was back on the independent circuit. But this had so much promise to it, I mentioned it to my editor at the Aftermags. So you may or may not know, for a period of 10 years, I wrote as a freelancer for Pro Wrestling Illustrated, The Wrestler, Wrestle America, and that whole family of magazines. And they were so excited at the prospect of a Mike Quackenbush versus Eddie Guerrero match that they sent their most reliable staff photographer, Tim Walker, to capture this match for posterity. So, especially to me, a lot was riding on this booking in Lynn, Massachusetts. If you've been a part of the Till We Make It tribe for a little while now, then you probably remember the video I made about my 3 favorite matches of all time, and one of them does feature Eddie Guerrero. The moment he showed up in ECW back in the mid-90s, I was magnetized to him. And when a little while later I found out he was also the guy doing Black Tiger, like at the Super J Cup 94 for New Japan, or in that year's Junior Tag League tournament, my mind was blown. I'm a real student of Eddie Guerrero's. So, turning up that day to the building, I couldn't wait to sit down and see what I could learn from him. I couldn't wait to discover if we had good chemistry together in assembling our match. But when I got there, what I discovered instead was a guy who had isolated himself in a corner of the building and had his face buried in a Bible. In addition to which, something not many people were privy to at the time, was that the WWF was already courting him back. And during this weird probationary period where they weren't sure if they were going to take another bet on him, they had dispatched 2 of the company's henchmen to sort of serve as an entourage around Eddie Guerrero, just to make sure he was on his best behavior, that he was putting his life back together, and that he'd be a good employee if they decided to bring him back to the main stage. And not too much later, they did. Not long after our match, Eddie was Intercontinental Champion again. Not that that had anything to do with me. Within wrestling, the Guerrero family has a certain reputation, and I don't mind telling you that reputation is the Guerreros are workhorses. They may not always be the biggest star in any particular era, but they can outwork just about anybody in the ring. Gory Guerrero, the patriarch of the Guerrero family, is known for his hard work. Did his star ascend to the same level as El Santo or Blue Demon from that era? No. But Gory Guerrero, to be fair, could work circles around both those guys. And whether we're talking about Hector or Chavo or Eddie Guerrero, that reputation is hard-earned. On any night, in any town, on any card, they could work circles around anybody. So not only was it thrilling for me as a student of Eddie Guerrero to be in the ring with him, but it was also a great test. I got to test myself against a guy who I think is top class. And if I'm being honest about it, I was a little intimidated going into that match. The Guerrero family has that reputation for a reason. They can outwork anybody in the ring. And Eddie himself had worked very hard to cultivate for himself a reputation as a world-class performer. And I had no illusions about it. I was not a world-class performer. When you add to that the fact that Eddie Guerrero with Dean Malenko created one of my all-time favorite matches, a match that still moves me to this day, even 25 years after the fact, well, I had to carry all of those things in. And yet, in order to fulfill my obligation as a real professional, I had to set that aside, cut through the entourage surrounding Eddie Guerrero, and get to work. In the hours leading up to that match, Eddie seemed like he was distracted at all times. He was really in his head. There's no doubt in my mind he was going through a really difficult period in his own life, and he wasn't especially talkative. And before I knew it, it was time for us to go to the ring. We had to do our 15 or 20 minutes, whatever it was, and all that time, it seemed to go by in a blink. Before I knew what was going on, well, it was time for a brain buster, and then a frog splash, and then the 3 count, and then time to head to the back. And then, after the match was all over, we plopped down next to each other in the locker room. I, completely drenched in sweat, and Eddie, looking like he could have easily wrestled for another 2 hours without even breaking a sweat. We found a quiet moment together. And I caught my breath, and I said to him, "Thank you for working so hard for me out there. You could have run circles around me for that entire match if you wanted to. I could not have possibly kept up with you. But you worked really hard to make it look like I was on your level. And you didn't have to do that. So thank you." And there was a brief pause, and he lifted his head, looked right at me, and he shared something with me. He said, "Mike, when I was just starting out, my father told me something really important that has stayed with me for my entire career. And I want to share it with you. If I went to the ring tonight and I made you out to be a 0, and then I beat you in the ring, well, who did I really beat? I just beat a 0. What a waste. And if I make you out to be a 0 in the ring, and then you beat me, who did I just get beat by? A 0. And then, what does that say about me? Our job as professional wrestlers is to build each other up, never to tear each other down." Even though nearly 20 years have passed since I was knees to knees in that locker room with Eddie Guerrero, it still remains crystalline in my memory. That bit of wisdom that Gory passed to Eddie and that Eddie passed to me that day in Lynn, Massachusetts still resonates very powerfully with me. And even though I've heard that same basic tenet repeated by other wrestlers using other words over the years, well, none of it matters quite as much to me as when I heard it directly from a guy I admire. And that was all the more we needed to connect that night. From then, we were able to swap stories from the road, we went out to dinner together, and when the whole weekend was at an end, he gave me his number. And he said, "If you ever need anything, if I can ever do something to help your career along, don't hesitate to call me." And I never called. I was too self-conscious to take him up on that offer. And a couple years later, when I heard the tragic news that Eddie was no longer with us, I really regretted the fact that I hadn't just picked up the phone to call him, if for no other reason than to say, "Thank you for what you taught me." If you're getting something out of today's video, won't you please subscribe to the channel? Leave me a like while you're at it. If you want to keep on learning, there's a video appearing over here so you can do exactly that. Or if you want to take your support of what I do here until we make it to the next level, follow the link and join our community over on Patreon. We'd love to have you.